Boom, what's up, Familia? Dayspring here with yet another special episode of Power of X-Men. Because today on the podcast, we are going to air our book club from yesterday, December 15th, 2024. We had a book club meeting and we were discussing Generation X issues 1 through 4 with the writer and creator of Generation X himself, Scott Lobdell. And obviously, Scott Lobdell needs no introduction because he was a defining writer for the X-Men franchise in the 90s. Onslaught, Age of Apocalypse, Phalanx Covenant, all of these stories we have because of him. He also did issues for Executioner Song and was just a very defining writer for the 90s in terms of the X-Men. Him and Joe Mad and Chris Pacello, they were just dream teams. I mean, that era was lightning in a bottle. So the reason why I chose Generation X issues 1 through 4, as someone on the book club discussion will say, it feels like you get so much out of just one issue, and it takes you a while to get through the issues, not because it's laborious or the writing's a little outdated, none of that. It is because it's good writing, because there's so much setup, so much happening in the back end. The art, it goes without saying that the art is incredible. Chris Pacello adds so many flourishes to these first 4 issues that just make it such a wonderful, very hyper style read. And that's what we love here out of our comics, hyper style, especially when it comes to the art. But the art is able to do what it's doing because you have such a great writer like Scott Lobdell. And the conversation does go past just these first 4 issues of Generation X. And, you know, by the way, the 4th issue of Generation X is a holiday issue. And sadly, we do not really get into the weeds of it because there were so many other discussions that we wanted to have with Scott since we had him here. Obviously, Scott has been on the podcast before. Please go check out those other interviews we have with him. He is a friend of the podcast. We adore him very much. But this conversation was very enlightening. People asked questions that I myself never would have thought to ask. And especially when you read these first 4 issues of Generation X, you may notice a couple of things. Like one, M and Gateway have some sort of history together, right? What's that about? M and Emma do not get along. They actually really clash. There's a lot going on with Husk. So we do get into it, but I just want to call out for the listener that if you have an opportunity to sit down and read these first 4 issues, they're very inclusive. Again, just sit down. I mean, listen, I drink with a glass of wine, but if you're not a drinker or not 21, sit down with like a yummy, like warm pizza and cherry Coke and just go through these first 4 issues because you really get to see the next generation of X-Men come into their own. And I don't want to spoil the conversation because Scott goes into it here, but the genesis of Generation X was that they wanted to relaunch New Mutants. And Scott was like, no, we need to do something new, something different. So that's why when you read these first 4 issues of Generation X, you really do get a sense that these are contemporary X-Men. Now listen, contemporary in the lens of 1994 because this book was published in 1994, but you'll notice that Paige is doing Cindy Crawford exercise videos. Jubilee is wearing bear claw slippers. Banshee has a moment where he goes, "Don't." It's all very emblematic of the times, and it was meant to be a very new, very fresh take on the X-Men because so many people in the industry at that time were trying to emulate the X-Men, especially things that were going on at Image and Wildstorm. And Scott was like, hey, absolutely not. If people are going to try to make new X-Men, we're going to be the ones to create a new X-Men team, successors to the X-Men. So please check out these issues. Issue 4, the holiday issue, is a very beautiful, beautiful issue that is sort of a little harrowing, where you have a mutant called Elliot who takes hold of a school because he's quote unquote ugly and not treated as well as the pretty kids. And the Generation X kids happen to be there. And once they reach the classroom, they find out that Elliot actually isn't a mutant. He just looks different. He was just born physically different, not physically what you would define as attractive. And people have treated him so terribly for that. And it's really a beautiful lesson about how we judge people on the exteriors and the effects it has on the individual. I mean, again, these are stories that were told in 1994, way ahead of a lot of the conversations we're having today. So again, sadly, we don't get into issue 4 as much. We do cover issues 1 through 3 quite a bit, talking about the dynamics of the team. But I wanted to do this 5-minute introduction just to set up book club and let you know we don't talk about issue 4. But with so much pride and pleasure, do we welcome Scott Lobdell, our book club guest. Please enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Mutant Menace Book Club. I am the host of Power of X-Men, Dayspring. Thank you all for joining. And the purpose of book club today is just to spread the joy and the passion we have for the X-Men. So if you read these issues, great. If you didn't, that's okay. Feel free to ask any questions that you want. Just some house rules. If you have a noisy environment, just mute your computer and you can unmute when you're going to ask a question. And if you just want to listen in and you don't want to participate, it's okay just to mute and turn off your camera. But everyone participating today gets a Power of X-Men sticker, and I will mail them out personally. So feel free to just email me your address at paul@powerofxmen.com. Now, without further ado, our guest today for the Mutant Menace Book Club is the legendary X-Men writer Scott Lobdell. He began writing comics at the age, you see, legendary right there. He began writing comics at the age of 17 after recovering from a lung surgery, and would go on to be an acclaimed comic book writer, especially with his work on the X-Men franchise. He is the reason that era is so defining, with iconic storylines such as Age of Apocalypse, Onslaught, and the Phalanx Covenant, which have become cornerstones of the X-Men mythology. He created Generation X, which is what we're here to discuss today, starred in the Pizza Hut Roundtable with Stan Lee, and wrote the groundbreaking Alpha Flight 106 issue where North Star came out. He is also my personal hero. This is why I'm still an X-Men fan till this day, because of his work on the franchise. Please, Amelia, welcome Scott Lobdell to Book Club.
Yay.
I'm going to pin you now, Scott.
Welcome, sir.
I noticed too, let me ask you, is Emma and Sean up there just because you're filming this, or
Yes,
they are always there in a place of honor?
No, I'm not going to lie to you. They are here deliberately because we are here with you today. Otherwise, it's just a bottle of Vouv and whiskey.
Okay, and is it just the two of them, or it looks like there's somebody else back there?
Yeah, so we got M as well, and we got Jubilee and Chamber, and these are the Marvel Legends. Did you know a Husk is coming? A Marvel Legends Husk is coming?
No, that's awesome. I saw the Funkos are doing Age of Apocalypse. That looks really fun. There's Blink and Sunfire.
And Apocalypse. They look so great.
Yeah.
All right, Scott. So I'm going to kick us off with a few questions, and anyone feel free just to unmute yourself and ask the questions you want to ask, especially pertaining to these first 4 issues of Generation X. But Scott, I think a lot of us want to know, what was sort of the genesis for Generation X? Where did they come out of? Where was this idea born from? Did you think of the Phalanx Covenant and then Generation X, or was it all part of this larger story you wanted to tell?
Originally, Bob Harris asked me on a Friday, he said, they want to bring back New Mutants. Do you want to toy around with that? Think about how you would do that. And I said, oh, that's kind of interesting. So that weekend I was thinking, well, it'd be really fun if they were like different. Like I used to just call them the Ken and Barbie, like the Jean Grey and Scott Summers. Like there's so many really impossibly good looking people that we were supposed to feel bad for them for being mutants, and it was always hard for me to get that feeling bad. And then, along came Nightcrawler and even Wolverine, to the degree that he had those perpetual claws and stuff, where it's like, well, what about the mutants that can't necessarily fit in? And I thought, well, that would be a fun take, like to do Generation X with characters that are not good looking. And like when you think of Chamber, the very first time he used his power, he blew out his whole chest cavity and half his face. And it's like, now, Cyclops can complain all he wants about his little red eye beams, but compare that to what Chamber has gone through, and you see it's this new generation of mutants. So I was thinking about that, and then I was thinking, well, I want to put them somewhere where they're not just in Xavier's school again, Westchester. And I thought, where could they go? And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, the Hellfire Academy is open, so I can put them there. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, why don't the Xavier's mansion become the Xavier Institute, and this becomes Charles's mansion? And then it's like, well, if I could, I know I don't want Cyclops, I know I don't want Xavier, and I knew I didn't want Cable, and not because they weren't great characters, but just because they've been doing this for years. And I thought, oh, that'd be really cool. Like Banshee was always one of my favorites from the very first days of Giant Size X-Men #1. And so I thought, oh, this could be cool. Like a guy who, has been a cop. He's been through the academy. The idea of him training people is something that he would fit right into, but he's not going to be a soldier. He's not going to be a politician. He's just, this kind of New York City cop with a thick Irish accent. And then I'm like, well, I don't know if that's enough. And then I was like, oh my God, like I had just written some Emma where she was kind of screwed up post the death of the Hellions. And I thought, oh, wow, that would be so cool to put the two of them together. So come Monday morning, I came in and I go, well, here's the thing that I'm really excited about doing New Mutants, but it will have nothing to do with New Mutants. It'd be like a completely different take. And he said, what would you call it? And I remember that I was in London maybe a month before that. And some fan came up to me and goes, he's like, it would be a really cool name. What about Generation X? That would be so cool. I'm like, well, that would be cool. That's a great name. So I said, I really want to do New Mutants, but I want to do this Generation X. And Bob's like, that sounds great. And so that became, because the thing is, it felt different enough from the New Mutants, which I can always have this thing when I work with artists or anybody, really. I always say, we've all seen the last thing. Let's see the next thing. Let's see the next group. And with Chris, Chris came a little bit later into the program, but when we started, he and I started talking about it, we were like, the discussion was, well, wait, who's the Wolverine character? Like, who's the Colossus character? And we saw all of this in when Image came out. Like every Image character, like you look at the Image guys, you go, oh, there's Colossus, there's their Nightcrawler, there's their Wolverine. And Chris and I became determined not to have a team that you could, that you look at and go, oh yeah, there's another knockoff of the X-Men. And then when it was discussed when it was going to be coming, we decided then to do the Phalanx Covenant. I have this thing that used to drive Fabian up the wall, and that is I would often make up things with no purpose in mind. Like, I believe it was X-Men 300, this father kisses his wife and daughter goodbye, and he gets on a van that's marked Phalanx. It's like, oh, I wonder what that's about. And everybody's like, what's that about? And I go, I don't know. It sounds really cool, though. Phalanx, it's a great word. It's a great X-Men word. It has X in it, and clearly, this human person is going off to, and then when you think about Phalanx and how big it got, it's kind of absurd if you pull the camera back far enough and think, would this group who became the Phalanx be driving around with like, hey, we're the Phalanx, we're here to pick you up, like a FedEx truck, we're here, hop on board, So, but that was a perfect example of like something that I had created with no real thought in mind other than, oh, that's interesting. And then when it came time to do Generation X, the idea is, well, what if the Phalanx is what, there's this huge assault on the X-Men, and naturally it all ties into, the next generation of mutants. And so that was, in this case, I want to say the egg came before the chicken. I'm not sure, whatever that is, whoever.
I think we have two questions from Anas and then Positive Fan. So Anas, why don't you kick us off first, and then Positive Fan, why don't you, once he's done, you can jump in with your question.
First of all, sir, thank you for being here, and I love your work. I really do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I wanted to ask about Monet St. Croix, how, what was the idea behind creating her, and how was it researching her? I'm an Arabic Muslim, so I care about how hard was it to research a background of a character from that area of the world that you don't know a lot about, and in an era where the internet was not available.
You're talking about Monet?
Yeah.
I actually had been to that corner of the world for Y2K. I went on I don't think the word is safari, but we went on a expedition, and I think it lasted about 10 days. And so it was in my head when I was thinking about, oh, wait a minute, that's all wrong, because I wasn't there until years later. Maybe what I meant was to say being there was fun because I was I'd read about Monet. The truth is that I didn't really, Monet's backstory that never really made it into the comic book, at least as it was created. She was going to be represent the two twin sisters who merged into one sister. And then somewhere along the line, around issue 30, that became Penance's backstory, which I don't really understand. Maybe someone can explain it to me someday. But to be honest, I didn't think about Monet's history as a person who is Muslim. So the thing is that honestly, being totally honest, I did not research her. I did not really, because that really wasn't where my interest in her was. It was more that she was twin sisters. One of them was autistic, and the idea is that when they merged together, they became this 18-year-old who had these incredible powers when they were together, but separately, they were two 9-year-old sisters. So to me, that's where all my thought process went into her as a character. So it never really occurred to me to dig deep into the world of her religious upbringing, which I don't necessarily apologize for, because I don't think that every character that gets created should try to encompass all elements of one character. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I wish I could say, oh my God, I researched it for months, but I really didn't. So did you like the character though in general?
Yeah, I love the character.
Yeah, there's a character, Sanyaka, who is one of the acolytes, and he was from Sri Lanka. And Fabian always used to harass me because he's like, I create Hazard. And he goes, and you create Sanyaka from Sri Lanka. Like, what the hell was that about? So, sometimes I think it's enough to have representation from a particular place in a particular country without necessarily trying to make that character carry the weight of, their country or their religion or their, whatever their sexuality, like, you know, even like when I create gay characters, I like with Bunker over in Teen Titans, I didn't want him to be representative of all gays. I wanted him to be representative of himself. So I don't know if that, you know. But next time I do, I'm calling you. Next time we invade a Muslim character, you're the guy, okay?
Warline
Thank you.
is one of the best accounts out there. He's so knowledgeable and he has his own podcast. Scott, I did send you the link. And then we do have Positive Fan who had a question, and I'm going to turn it over to him to ask a question.
Thanks, Paul. And Scott, you're not alone. I think everybody's still trying to figure out the whole penance thing. But my question was, I think that I was always curious if this, especially hearing you talk about choosing Banshee to be one of the headmasters, if this was like a happy accident or if it was something that inspired it. But I think it was the Days of Future Present, I think they refer to him as like they referred to Banshee as like the leader of the next generation. That was a bunch of annuals. Like that was like a group of annuals that came out, I don't know, maybe 5 years before that or 4 years before that, something like that. And so I was curious if like you were like, oh, we've got precedent there, or if that was just like a happy accident that you arrived at Banshee first and then you're like, oh, because I know they used it in some of the promo materials that were coming up promoting Generation X. So just kind of curious if there was like oh, hey, great, we've got this that aligns well with what I was already thinking, or if it was like hey, look, what about Banshee?
Yeah, no, that would be a fall under happy accident, but this is the very first time I've heard that, so that's kind of interesting. So, but I will say he was always such a great character. I remember, you know, I didn't read a lot of comic books before I was 17, but I do remember, I mean, he had the worst haircut. He had that like Marlo Thomas flip, you know, that girl flip. So I always thought, wow. And then when he came back the second time, it's just such a cool character. So, but yeah, that's, I love learning new things from these podcasts and stuff because no, I didn't know that. So.
David, you have David, you have a question.
Actually, my brother's going to go for the first one. So,
hey, how you guys doing?
Nice. Which one's your brother and which one's you? I can't tell.
I'm me.
I'm the brother. I'm Michelangelo. Nice to meet you, Scott.
Hi, Michelangelo. Is that your brother?
That's David. That's my brother.
Uh-huh.
My question for you is related to how much planning went into some of these characters in terms of their abilities. Because one of the things I really liked about Generation X is as the issues are going, you're kind of learning more of what these teenagers can do. Because it seems like they don't really know what they can do yet, right? Because they're young. Emma is trying to help them along the way. So my question is, did you go in kind of planning the extent of their abilities, or were you guys kind of playing with it along the way and evolving the characters as the plot demanded?
I would say sort of a combination of both, in the sense that, Iceman's a perfect example of when, for years he was a snow cone, and then he became an ice cube, giant ice cube.
Right.
And it wasn't until Emma got in his mind that all of a sudden she was like, hey, you can do something that nobody else can do. Right. And so, as somebody who came to the X-Men, 30 years in, I always thought, well, it's interesting, like, to what extent have people been able to use their powers or grow over the years? It's easy to look at Jean Grey and say, well, she became the Phoenix, so that's a pretty good upgrade, and Angel became Angel. But the thing with these characters was that I really wanted to play up the school aspect, and even when in the first few issues, when M-Plate was going to be the villain, mm-hmm. There was this question around the office of, well, why don't we use Magneto or somebody who's a major villain, Mr. Sinister, Apocalypse. And I was like, no, let's, my goal was always not to get them to be the next group of X-Men. It was really just to get them to survive the experience. And I believe if it never made it out loud, I don't know, but, the idea of using Sean was, as a cop, he just wanted to get them through puberty with their powers and alive. And he didn't unlike Scott and Charles, he didn't want them to become X-Men. He just wanted them to live. And if they graduated and they went on to live their lives, that was great. If they, if they decided they were going to join the Hellfire Club, to Sean, that would be, well, that's your decision. So he was, I really tried to keep the central idea that this was a school and these characters were learning their powers. So, but I will tell you that, there's a novel came out, a friend of mine, Elliot Magan, they asked me if I would write the novel for Generation X. I said, well, I really don't have any time, but I have a friend who writes novel. And they said, okay. So I wrote out the plot for the novel. And at one point I read it when it was in the galleys, and the phone rings and Chamber picks up the phone. He's like, hello? And they're like, yeah, is somebody there? He's like, all right, hold on just a minute. And I'm like, he can't do that. He has a psionic ability. He doesn't, he does not possess the ability to use a phone. That doesn't make any sense. So,
Right.
There's certainly things that you go through when you're doing the characters, but this might be a good example, is that in Generation X #1, we see Monet decides not to go to the airport because she's climbing a tree. And that clue was specifically there because in her heart, she's an 8-year-old girl, as far as I was concerned. So when they're doing all this stuff, she's up there climbing a tree. And what I wanted to do eventually was to reveal that she was 8, and then have Jubilee be like, I've been battling in this war of words, like this, I've been being one-upped by this 8-year-old for the last year, that was going to come out. But then later on in Generation Next, when we see the twins are separated and we meet Know-It-All, you see that she can't move, but that she's super, super, super brilliant. So these were a bunch of clues that were in the issues. In fact, even in the second issue where, what's her name? Penance gets out, and Emma's like, well, I have a few theories about how this works. And the truth is that, that was her sister who was doing all that. Was the brilliant sister.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up I wanted to go back to that whole Chamber answering the phone thing. See, I think a very Scott thing would be to have Chamber pick up the phone, answer it, and then realize that, oh wait, they can't hear me. If I was to write that, that's how I would do it. I think Scott, I don't know if you would do the same, but I think that's a totally you thing, because I grew up reading and writing, based off of from his work. So it's funny that I have the chance to talk to him.
The other thing that he did too that I thought was particularly really interesting, and sort of like a kind of, I don't want to say like a contrary at the time, but it definitely was against the stereotype, was that Banshee and Emma are not a love interest for each other at all. And it's very much that Mulder and Scully situation, which I know Mulder and Scully eventually do have like a little romance here and there, but I think the idea was to make sure that those characters were contemporaries first, and that they were Banshee lacks in sort of the academics, Emma makes up for it, and vice versa. So I think the way Generation X is crafted, especially these first 4 issues, is incredibly smart and just so ahead of its time. And even I don't know if a lot of people picked this up, some of the Easter eggs for pop culture at the time, which was like the Cindy Crawford video, Jubilee wearing the bear claw slippers, Banshee with the Lennon glasses. I mean, those are things that really do send the signal that this is not, this isn't New Mutants. This is an entirely different class with their own generation.
No, agreed. And I honestly, it's one of the funnest runs to actually look at, because if you go and you're looking at it and you see Chris's art, there's a million things going on in every single picture, from a lizard doing, from a lizard like emoting or something to I don't know. There's always something to look at in every scape.
Well, I was just reading it. I was rereading number one, and Chris created that character DOA, the guy who is the chauffeur to M-Plate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like he just drew him, and I'm like, okay, well, there he is, and he always forgets to say sir because he's like, he's like driving around this monster trapped between dimensions, but it's still his job, so I call him sir. It's like, so Chris was always drawing him things, and I would never give him the satisfaction of calling him and going, why are there elves all throughout this story, or what is the frog? You keep drawing the frog. What is the significance? So I would just take whatever he would draw and run with it, and then he would get we were too close to wire to spend much time going over everything, but he would get the issues and he'd come out and be like, oh, I didn't even think the elves were going to be part of the story, but they are. It's like, so it's really, really fun. He did an issue of you've seen the issue where Jubilee is on the plane, and the plane is about to crash, and she's doing those bubbles, waving those bubbles back and forth. And that was 1000% Chris. I just, I got the issue and I looked at it, I'm like, well, there's that plane crash that I ordered, but why the whole plane crash takes place during a bubble shower, I don't know, but it was like, okay, just run with it. Because we had a deal when he said to me, when at first I wanted him, he was like, but I don't draw like Jim Lee. And I was like, well, a lot of guys draw like Jim Lee. If I wanted to get a Jim Lee clone, I'd go try to find one. So he said, well, Scott, he goes, I did this thing when I was doing Shade, where these two characters were sitting on a porch and they're having this conversation, and I decided on a front stoop, and he goes, and I decided to draw the whole 2 pages as knees, like two people sitting, like, how one would turn to the other, or, and he goes, and they made me redraw it. So I think kind of odd sometimes. And I said, Chris, if you draw, my promise to you is that if you ever hand me 2 pages of knees, I will I'll write 2 pages of knees. And that became our little, our agreement, and we stuck by it. So we only had one agreement, and that was with a page of Skin meeting his mother at a bus stop in Compton in LA. And he wanted the page. He thought I should script the page. And I said, no, what you've done is like gorgeous the way it is. And he's like, no, you're wrong. You really need to script it. I go, no, I'm right. You're really good. It doesn't need any of my words screwing it up. And then it came out and he's like, okay, you're right. It was pretty amazing. So,
well, Daniel Funk says that he loved the art and it's very unique and he thinks it suits the story very well. And I couldn't agree with him more. Susanna is next for a question.
Yes. I was just curious about your thoughts about the trial of Gambit. Did you like how it came out? Do you have any regrets? Do you have things that you wish you could have done differently?
The answer I'm gonna guess is yes. There are probably things I would have done differently. I didn't read it. I think I started out I turned in the plot, and it was pretty much the end of my time at Marvel, where they were we were just my contract was up and they didn't want to renew it, and I was like, that's fine. I got another contract over at Wildstorm, which was essentially the same contract, so I was like, okay, this is where I'm going to go. But then I forget why, but I just remember that about 6 pages in, they had a different idea of where they wanted to go with Gambit and the Traitor storyline. So I think I'm only responsible for the first 6 pages of that story, but I don't really. I think one time I glanced and they had Gambit wandering off in the snow, like he had somehow disappointed them, so they left him to die in the Antarctic. And my stories almost always, to the point of ad nauseum, almost always have to do with redemption. So to me, I think the X-Men would have been better off, figuring a way to help Gambit forgive himself for what he. As far as the story I know, the story that I'd written was the idea that he was hired to, as a thief. It was his job to take these guys and get them into what was going to be Xavier's mansion. And so he was like, yeah, I'm a thief and I'm going to help these people steal. He didn't realize that the mutant marauders were going to kill all these people, and that he'd been feeling terribly guilty ever since he found out. And that's really what drove him to find the X-Men, become an X-Men, become such an important part of the X-Men. So that was, to me, the story. And I think they wanted a story where he was going to get sentenced, driven out of the X-Men and, left to die in the Arctic. And I thought, well, that's a little harsh to me, but I've never read it. What did you think of it? Because you read it.
Honestly, I think given what happened, Rogue let Remy off easy.
I said to the Arctic
trial of Gambit at the end.
She when she left him, Scott, in the Arctic, they retconned it that she absorbed some of Gambit's own self-loathing, and that's why she left him, and then she felt real bad about it.
She should not have.
Yeah, I'm a big Gambit fan, and I don't know how I feel about how that went. I think my boy was done dirty. Oh.
I just always wish that you and Joe could have done that whole issue. That still to this day, when I reread it, I just think, if they had to start a new creative team, start it with 351 and let you two go out on top. I hate when a story builds to a crescendo like that, and then they get fill-in artists and no offense to the next writer who I thought did a good job with the title, but that was real. The timing on that sucked as a fan.
Yeah, in the defense of everyone else, I had been called on over the years to wrap up other people's stories, so I get it. I did hear a podcast recently by beloved Larry Hama, sorry, where they were asking him about Generation X, and he's like, "Oh yeah, they hired me because the sales were really low, and the book was going to be canceled, and they hired me to fix it." I'm like, okay, the sales weren't low. There was no, he got the job because he was working Wolverine, and that's great. But it's not like, in Generation X was selling very, very well into the 25s. So, but I only bring it up because, yes, sometimes you can't, I would have loved for Larry or the editor to call me up and go, "Hey, we see this thread with Penance, and, we don't know where she's from, but we know that Monet is two girls, but what if Monet is actually Penance and Penance is and I'm like, I think if they had asked me, I probably would have been able to put them on the right track, but I never spoke to Chris either about all the things that I did to X-Men, so I would never expect anybody to check in with me either, so but so I didn't know. That's interesting about the absorbing the self-loathing. I didn't realize her power is that specific that she could,
get self-loathing.
Yeah. How about No, I'm not doing self-loathing. So. What about father issues? No. Well, maybe father. Yeah, I can do father sister. Yeah.
Scott, next up we have Letitia, who has a question.
Hello, Letitia.
I'm Brazilian, so if I say something wrong, you just correct me, okay? I'm a huge fan of your work, and I would like to ask something. I wanted to know which teenage character you enjoyed working on the most, like on Generation X.
Ooh, that's a toughie. You know, someday you will grow older and you'll have children, and somebody will ask you who your favorite child is, and you'll be like, I love them all. So that's part of the answer. I will say that, like, I guess the changes, like, I really loved Paige Guthrie, and part of the reason I loved her was because she, you know, was the most inauthentic and yet the most ambitious. You know, like, she, if you look, especially at the beginning, she would often think in her southern accent and her southern drawl, but when she would speak, it was always proper English, unless somebody said something and it startled her, and then she went back to her. You know, so she really was, of all the people there, she was the one that most wanted to graduate and become an X-Men. And then I believe it was shortly after the Legacy Virus storyline that she was just devastated, because her whole life plan was to grow up to be an X-Men, and then she found out that her mutant power was capable of killing her through the virus. So to me, she was always. I just loved her to pieces. So she was really fun to write, and I think also the Mondo that I had in my head, because I was just rereading the first issue for this, and the idea is that, you know, the idea behind creating Everett was going to be create a character with no traumatic backstory, you know, because most of them all have these things that are wrong with them. And Everett was going to be just a happy guy who liked this group of people he was hanging out with. And Mondo, when we first see Mondo, the idea was to create a character who, you know, if he met Magneto in the middle of a fight, he might be like, hey, and go up and give Magneto a hug, because he's like, you know, I think you just need a hug. You know, we don't need to fight. We can, you know, everybody's fighting. Let's just hug. And so that was the idea, was to create a character that just had so much love in his heart that he had love for the villains as well, which I don't think we'd ever seen before. So, and yeah, so I think they were all, you know, Jubilee was a favorite. Jubilee was partially a favorite because before I got to her, she was really sort of like a sidekick that you didn't really understand why Wolverine would have her around, you know. And then when I finally got to write her, I was like, wow, this character is so interesting. And so, you know, that was fun. What about you? Who's your favorite teen of the Generation X?
I really love Jubilee. She's my favorite character ever, but I love Paige too. She won my heart.
Right? Oh, good. Thank you. Do you ever cosplay?
I cosplayed Jubilee once.
Oh. I saw maybe you can look it up online, but I saw somebody cosplaying Paige, and she had her face, and then she had half of her face ripped off, and then like diamonds underneath. It was so awesome. So I heard she came back for the reunion. Is that true? Or
she's back in Astonishing X-Men, which is one of the digital comics they're doing on the Marvel Unlimited app. But listen, they're doing a Generation X reunion. The writer's great, the art's great, but it's not Scott Lobdell. How about that? So,
well, we can't fault them for that.
Let me throw it over to Rod, who has a question over in New Zealand.
Thank you, Dayspring, and kia ora, everybody. Scott, I met you when you visited Wellington, New Zealand many years ago, and you signed my some of my comics, so thank you.
You're wearing that same sweatshirt too, right?
This is newer. Yeah, I've lost a little bit here.
That was quite. Oh.
Yeah, so nice to see you again, and thanks especially Paul for coordinating this. I have two questions which are quite specific, but before that, I just really want to acknowledge you, Scott, because I think that I probably speak on behalf of many of us that one of the reasons why we still read the X-Men is due to the enduring impact of your work and your approach to the books. And I mean, we talk a lot about all the seeds and foundation that Claremont laid and Jim Lee's designs, etc. But I think your approach, like the cartoon was an appetizer, and what you offered us for all those years is the reason why we've stuck around. So I just really want to honor you and thank you for that.
And thank you, Charles.
Yeah. And so and also just on Mondo, coming from New Zealand, where we have the largest population of Samoan people in the world, it always meant so much to see somebody from the South Pacific. And I think the way in which you captured our culture here in terms of how much we do genuinely care, how slow we are intentionally, and that's to do with population size, because there are only 5 million people in New Zealand. We have a high degree of accountability to each other, and I think that comes through in some of that behavior. But anyway, my two questions.
I was there too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. That's good.
There's a dinner one night. Everyone was there.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so here are my two questions. First of all, in the collector's preview, there's a little interview with you, and this has always bothered me, so I'm really thrilled I get to ask this. You have a little box where you describe each of the characters you've designed, and for Penance, you describe her nationality as Yugoslavian. Again, that kind of piqued my interest because some of my ancestors were Yugoslavian. And you say, whilst this won't be a glum and gritty series rife with nihilistic crap, there certainly will be some angst throughout, most of which will initially be provided by this mysterious young woman. She possesses a shocking secret that, while having nothing to do whatsoever with her mutant ability, might ultimately threaten her position on the team. And so, and I remember, I think, when Emma read her mind at some stage, there was kind of some war imagery in one panel. And so my first question, I'll ask both just so I'm not talking too long and taking time from other people, but my first question was, irrespective of what happened later with Penance and Monet and the various forms and stuff, in your design for the character, what were you thinking in terms of her Yugoslavian identity, and what was her shocking secret? And my second, do you want to answer that first?
Is the second question related, or?
No, the second question is separate, about another character design.
Okay. Penance, if you look at the first two issues, it's pretty clear, although no one ever suspected it, but the idea is that she was deaf. And so when, that's why no one, as they're trying to talk to her, she never responds to anybody. The only person she comes close to responding to is Chamber, because he's not speaking, directly. He's more empathizing with her because of his sonic abilities. But the first thing Emma says when she says it, she says, I get nothing. I don't even hear it. There's nothing there. So like, there's all these clues as to the fact that she is deaf. And the idea was, it was going to be, what we're going to find out was that her ability, she had this kind of porcupine, diamond hard exterior, which would make it very difficult to get through to her. And the idea is, once she was going to, there's also an issue, I think it was issue 5, where Jubilee is like, I'm determined to figure this out. And she's like reading from a book, and she's like, bonsoir, and all these words, and she's still not responding. And it's because she doesn't know, she can't respond because she doesn't, she doesn't even have a basis for language. So, and that's what I thought was kind of cool about Emma, was that she couldn't grasp her thoughts because she didn't have any thoughts that she could put into words, because words had no meaning to her. And that was going to make things difficult, the same way that having a 9-year-old on the team was going to be, so that was her big secret. Is at one point they were going to be like, okay, well, we've reached her, but now that we've reached her, we have to accept that it's not safe for us to. It's not safe for her, and it's not safe for the rest of the team to have this, deaf character going into battle with, and also the idea is too is that she came from a war-torn background, and then she was held prisoner by Emplate, so she was certainly not a trusting person by any means. So, but so I thought that was an interesting weigh in on a character, So.
Oh my gosh, that is. I'm so pleased I asked that question because my husband. I'm getting a little bit emotional. My husband is deaf partially, and so many of I think the characters you created here are so representative, and it kind of goes back to what you were talking about before in terms of not just having beautiful people, but people who have trauma and flaws and stuff. So thank you so much.
He doesn't have a skin, right? I mean, a diamond.
I can't possibly reveal that.
That means yes.
But, shall I ask my second quick question?
Sure, why not? Unless Power of X-Men says the nay.
Thanks.
No, of course, Rod. Go for it.
So this is about Chamber and his power, because I noticed in early issues sometimes the kind of sonic energy around him went blue, and I always wondered whether or not that was just a colorist choice, that sometimes they wanted things to be colored differently, or whether or not there was something that you'd included in the script or the design of the character. And this specific page after he calms down Penance, where the energy changes, and if it was part of the design, I feel like it's really a shame we haven't seen that stick around.
No, to the best of my knowledge, he did not. There was never any decision that I was aware of to changing his colors. One of the interesting things about Chamber was, like, Generation X, especially the first 12 issues, was very much a family affair. Like, Richard Starkings was the letterer of the series, and I said, listen, I don't want to write, the standard, hey, governor, my name's Chamber, what can I do for you? And he's like, good, and don't ever do that accent again. And so, but as a letterer, I said, anytime you think that he should say something, because you are English, just take whatever I said, and if you see another word for it or whatever, then you should use it. So that's why I try to keep it authentic. But so it is possible that somebody may have had a reason for coloring him blue or green or whatever, but I think it more had to do with
that's cool. But, I just noticed on that specific page there's like a gradual shift in his power through that moment with Penance, and it always kind of piqued my interest. But thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, Charles, we have you up next.
That beam of light through your eye is perfect.
Thank you.
Hey, Charles.
Hey, I just echo everything that was just said. So my question is about Blink, actually, and the Phalanx Covenant. If that was a character you created, and obviously she ended up being really popular, and people were really sad when she died. At least I was. I feel like I remember it being an outrage. So I was just curious, like, the story there, if she truly was like throwaway at first, and then it became this thing, or just the process of that.
Well, once we had Chris and I had figured out who all the Generation X characters were, and then when we went back to Phalanx Covenant, we thought, well, let's start off by really driving home the point that these kids are endangered, and so. But Chris had started on Generation X, so I was like, well, what about Blink? And if you look at the characters that I came up with, they were always kind of bizarre. And so the idea that Blink would use these metal rods to teleport herself and other people, it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then I spoke to Joe, and Joe came up with that really odd kind of fishy gray, purple hair. And she was so awesome that I really wanted to keep around, but I kind of feel that, the reason why she was there was to drive home this point. So she did die at the end, and then when she did, everybody, the fan letters just came flying in. Everyone's like, bring back Blink. And that was the joke at the office. There was like, hey, they're saying Big Bang Bang. I go, yeah, well, say it 3 times fast, and we'll see. If you can say it 3 times fast, we'll bring it back. But when, happy birthday, everyone. So when we did Age of Apocalypse, we were sitting around and we were saying, okay, if you can have any characters, who would you want? And I was like, well, I want Sabretooth on the team, but he has to have Wildchild on a chain, and he'll let him go, and he just kills everybody, and then he like slams him on the table and throws him over his shoulder and hooks him up again. And they're like, that's kind of odd. Who else do you want to go? I would love Morph, but it would be Changeling from the original character who pretended to die when Charles was pretended to be Charles when he died. And so there was all these thoughts, and I said, I really want Blink, and they're like, Blink, and I go, yeah, this would be great. You should come back. And I hate to admit to being sadistical, but I thought, oh wow, this is going to be so mean because I know how Age of Apocalypse ends, and we're going to bring back Blink, and everything gets so excited, and that's why she was so front and center, because I love the character. And then, but I knew she was going to die again, so I thought, okay, well, that's her role in the universe. But then shortly after that, they said, hey, we want to bring her into a series. And so I said, okay, well, we brought back, Dark Beast and Sugarman and some other characters, so why not use that Clarice to bring her back? So, but yeah, I love that character. So I will tell you one quick story is that sometimes you read people are mean on Reddit, and they're like, Scott shouldn't be writing comics because he's not relevant anymore. And I was watching The Gifted, which had a character being chased down in an alleyway, and I never watched TV, but I was like, oh, Gifted seems like the X-Men's X-Men on TV. I wonder how they handle that. So it opens up this girl being chased into this underpass, and these cops come and they're about to shoot her, and then she blinks away. I'm like, oh my god, there she is. That's the gal. That's my Blink. And the camera faded to black, and then it came up on a commercial. And that was the first time I saw the commercial for Happy Death Day, my movie at Blumhouse. And I'm like, wow, 25-year gap. And somehow I happen to maintain my relevance. How interesting. So, and then I hear from guys like you and everybody here, and I think, oh, things I created, 30 years ago, they still resonate. So,
absolutely. 100%.
Well,
thank you.
Happy Death Day is such a wonderful film. I love it so much. It's like Freaky Friday, or excuse me, Groundhog's Day, except as a horror film. And it was so well written, Scott.
Thank you. Whose birthday is it? Everyone's saying
So it's Anas's birthday officially. Happy birthday, Anas. War Lion.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Death Day. Don't relive this day 20 times, right? Unless you should.
I'm sorry, I lost you there for a second.
Oh, I said don't relive this day 20 times. Like, War Lion, I know you, right? We met, haven't we?
No.
Oh,
we met, maybe we chatted once or something online, but
okay.
I've never left Egypt actually. So
never left where?
Egypt and Kuwait. I lived in the Middle East. Never left that.
Well, tell them next time Egypt does a comic book convention to send for me, and then we'll meet. Do you guys have comic book conventions there?
Not really. I think the only 2 countries that have in the Middle East are United Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Well, we'll find a place in Europe. We'll just have a small one. I mean, Egypt. I don't know.
Anas, since it is your birthday and we just called on you, do you want to ask your question really quickly?
Sure thing. So Since Marvel is doing those like throwback minis to like old stories and stuff, I was wondering which stories would you, sir, like love to go back to and explore further. And I want to mention that to me, like one of your favorite eras is the Summers family adventures, like Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, Ascani-san. And I would love to see that era explored, especially since there's a lot of time jumping there. So I think there's a lot that could be done there.
Mhm.
It also made me a fan of like the recent return of Cable to comics, like because I'm a fan of that original stuff that he did. Like seeing it imitated by other writers made me excited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that would be really fun to do. I remember when we first started, I was like, once it got going with Gene and I was like, I even said to Bob, I'm like, we should do one of these a year and just keep going. Like, the whole Ascani-san world was really fun. I would have to say if I could, I don't like to think about the past, but I will tell you that I think if I could extend anyone's storyline, it would be Operation Zero Tolerance. Like I really felt, it's funny because I really felt strongly about bringing the X-Men back to their roots and, getting rid of the mansion that housed, 100 students and getting rid of the Blackbird that, anytime they need to be anywhere across the world, they'd hop on and zip over. And, they had the healers in the Morlocks. And then they also had the danger room that it wasn't enough to roll spike bowling balls at people. Suddenly they had to have this like super, super holographic technology. And I was like, I really think the X-Men could be really serviced well by getting back to the basics, like putting them on the run, getting rid of the mansion, getting rid of the technology, getting rid of the healing, getting rid of all of that and trimming it just down to a handful of mutants and how they are going to navigate with this unstoppable force coming at them. So I think if I was going to if I would have the chance to do anything, it would be that. So, although I do have to say it was with Carlos Pacheco, who was like, amazing and amazing guy, amazing artist. And so it would be hard to go in and do it without him, but all things considered in my head, that is, and it's funny because right after I ended that storyline, suddenly there's like mutant pop music and who's your favorite mutant author? And, oh, look, it's the Tonight Show with the favorite mutant. It's like, I thought it was the complete opposite of where I thought the X-Men would have been better served. So, but,
all right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Anas. Francisco. Happy birthday again, Anas.
Thank you.
Francisco, you're up.
Oh, hello. Hi. Very excited to talk to you. And I love rereading Generation X again. And I loved Blink also. And really curious about M's relationship with Gateway, because he's supposed to be her mentor, but we never really had the backstory for that. So I was curious to know where would that go.
Well, I could tell you, because I read that today, because Paul was nice enough to send it to me. And I looked at it and go, wow, I really don't remember that. I just, I remember needing M to show up with her abilities intact, because I thought it would be really fun to be, to have one character there who's like the opposite of everybody else. She just knows her powers and she knows how they work. And I thought, oh, that's really cool if that were Gateway. Because, Gateway did have a lot on his plate for things that he had done that, which is why he came up with the name Penance. He wasn't actually even speaking about Penance. He was saying, I'm bringing her because I have so much to make up for. And so, but that was like one of those things like the Phalanx, that it was in my head And I thought, oh, that could be interesting to. It's kind of fun. Like it's interesting when you're doing a series. It's sort of like if you remember the Happy Days, the TV show. You know, like people can think of the Fonz and be like, oh yeah, he's the best character. But he wasn't supposed to be the best character. He was supposed to walk on and punch a jukebox and walk off, and that was it. Similarly, like with Wolverine, when Wolverine was introduced, nobody thought, you know, that the 5'4" Canadian was going to become the most popular character in all of mutantdom, you know. So sometimes you start out with a storyline or a character or subplot, and then you find yourself getting pulled in different directions, and then that subplot kind of stays. Yeah. So I wish I could tell you, and I could probably honestly make up something and be like, oh yeah, that's cool. I mean, I know clearly with
no, but I understand the real, because Gateway was also a character that knew everything and sent characters everywhere. So it was interesting to see Monet was also a character that was very knew about everything. It was curious that they had the same type of knowledge about everything around them. So it was interesting.
That with that reveal, I was thinking, I wonder how much else Gateway knows about other characters, you know? Like, is he the first, you know, he's a character that exists within time and space, so theoretically he could have, you know, trained young Charles when he was getting his powers, you know, like there's really no limit to what Gateway could do and where he could go, you know? Yeah. I don't know what he could do, meaning superpowers. I mean, what he could do, meaning from what he knows, you know. So
also all the thing about the lineage, because Gateway is supposed to be Bishop's grandfather, and Monet's and someone wrote about Monet's relationship to Bishop, like she was his grandmother, so they're all
I think
related.
He's like, you know. I mean, the very first time Bishop sees her, he's like, why is my grandmother here? You know.
I have a question really quickly, Scott, though. It says we're on the subject of M. I found it really curious when I was rereading these issues that M and Emma do not get along, and yet they're the ones that are probably the most alike. However, Emma sees so much of herself within Husk. And Husk is even like, oh, is this a compliment or an insult? And I'm just curious, when you were crafting that dynamic, why you made those choices for like M and Emma to sort of be opposing to each other. What was it about Husk that Emma really resonated with?
The first question is that having Emma around means never having a secret that you keep to yourself. She's like, you know, I don't know, Google or something, like she, you know, there's nothing you can think or do that she doesn't know whether, you know, you're, what it is. Whereas young M, even Claudia knew that she had a secret to keep. And she even says I think it's the second issue, when she's like, do not ever, ever go in my mind again, because it's going to be really bad, you know? And so Emma's like, okay, calm down. But so really, like, if you're somebody who has a big secret, the last person you want in the room with you is Emma, and the last person you want, you know, going through your mind like an addict looking at old photos is Emma. So, you know, she drew a line very quickly. I do think that, you know, when I always loved the idea that Emma didn't really look like Emma when she was younger. You know, like Emma's a very, you know, busty, leather-wearing, blonde, you know, perfect version of, you know, somebody who would grow up to be the White Queen. And I always tried around, I think you saw it in a flash forward issue, where, you know, when she got there, she was this kind of like mousy, brown-haired girl, and started to leave, or, you know, she was starving. She came to Manhattan, and she had no food, no place to live. And all of a sudden she realized that she could read minds. And suddenly she got herself invited to like the best parties, and she would go to Wall Street, and she'd just like sit there and eat her lunch, and somebody would be like, well, this merger is going to happen, but I can't tell anybody about it. And she's like, ha, so she was, she created this version of herself that we see today. And in a lot of ways, that is what Paige, it's essentially Paige's story. But what she wanted to do is she wanted to become the best X-Men. Emma wanted to be someone that, doesn't starve, doesn't ever, wants for nothing. And so in a way, she sees Paige and thinks you can do more than this. You can want more than just to be, what's your role? Be the leader of the X-Men, So that's why I think she sees herself in a way that, as near as I know, we could learn, but none of the other characters would ever learn. Like, I thought that would be a really fun secret for us to know the origin of, Emma without anyone else ever knowing. So.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much, Scott, for that. Gerard, I have you up next for your question.
Hello. Sorry. Thanks, Paul. Hey, Scott. How are you doing? I would just like to thank you for picking Sean to lead the team. I'm from the same county as him in Ireland. And according to this issue of X-Force by Fabian, I'm from the same hometown. So I've been obsessed with him ever since.
You have to take that with a grain of salt because Fabian knows jack shit about anything. So
I reached out to him on Twitter and he said, I don't know, I threw a dart at the map. So actually, I kind of just came into comics like right on Age of Apocalypse, so and then into Age of Onslaught, or the Onslaught saga. So yeah, your comics were like my childhood completely. So thanks for that. I guess just in terms of Age of Apocalypse, kind of from reading around it afterwards, I took it more, maybe I'm picking it up wrong, but that with the Age of Apocalypse team, because it was that much harsher world, the X-Men would more kind of freely kill in it. I remember like Iceman freezing a guard and then just shattering them. Did you was it a bit like a What If, that you kind of had a little bit more freedom with characters, that they could be a bit more violent and maybe the people they were fighting didn't have to do you think, was it a bit freer than normal comics writing where the villains didn't have to stay around?
But I think so, but I also think it spoke to the very core of the question of what is a world without Xavier. Like Xavier, I don't think would ever condone killing someone. Although probably Wolverine got away with more than he should have. But I think the idea is like the difference between Xavier teaching Bobby, about his powers and the danger room and stuff, is without that, and you just have this guy who can break whatever rules he wants, break any of society's rules that he wants in an effort to, overthrow Apocalypse. That's what we would get. I think that speaks to the idea that at the heart of the X-Men was Xavier, and he would have kept them from. That's probably all that kept that line. That's probably all that kept certain characters from crossing that line that you're talking about. Well, the other thing too is that when we started talking about Age of Apocalypse, it was the first series that I was tasked with coming up with the overall storyline, like things like Extinction Agenda, and the other series was always Fabian. And I was like, I really want to do something different rather than making people read 1 out of 60 or issue 23 out of 60 or issue 67 out of, well, that would be wrong, but 57 out of 60. I was like, what if we did a storyline that had an alpha and an omega, and we know how it starts and we know where it ends, and where it ends is on the bridge with the nukes falling, and so when we had the first meeting, I was explaining the world to them, and then I said, so you just need to get your characters to the bridge. And whatever you do, with what other characters, you just, you need to get Scott there, you need Jean there, you need, Wolverine there, you need Ileana, you need Colossus. Anything else is up to you. And everybody got really mad at first. And they're like, you can't just drop a story in our laps. What are we supposed to do? I go, what do you mean you get to do anything? Like anything. All you need to do is get them to the end of, to get them to the bridge at the end of the story. And they're like going, well, it's not fair. Like, we don't even know like what order you're supposed to read. Like, how are we going to tell people what order to read the issues? I go, oh, it's really, really simple. They read 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they read 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they read 1, 2, 3, 4, and everybody just reads 1, 2, 3, 4. And they're like, oh, okay, well, wait a minute. And so like, people will say sometimes when they talk out their butts that I was very controlling in the stuff that I would do. But actually, like, this was a perfect example of I just encouraged everybody to take those 4 issues and tell the stories that you want to, because there were no ramifications that were going to have to be addressed at the end of it, because they were all going to go. The end of the Age of Apocalypse was going to end, and Xavier was going to come back, and everything was going to be fine. So, so to your point, like, there was a lot of. I remember when Generation Next happened with issue 3. Did you read Generation Next?
Sorry, Jared. No,
yes.
I didn't. I tried to start today, but I kept getting distracted.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Generation X is a perfect example of it's a post-apocalyptic world. There's these people in a death camp, and the between issue 3 and 4, this girl broke up with me, and I was devastated. And so when I sat down to write issue 4, I was like, everybody dies. Everybody. And read it, you'll see those last 3 pages are probably like, last 5 pages, maybe the saddest 5 pages in all of X-Men. It's just, I won't ruin it for you, but it's really, really, really sad. It made me feel great. No, just kidding. It made me feel really sad. But it made me feel like I was putting down, real emotions onto the table. And so, but I could get away with that because, I couldn't do that in a regular series. I could do other emotional things, which I think I did often, but I couldn't kill off a whole team. So,
actually, thinking back, I thought you meant the main Generation X, but I think from the Age of Apocalypse version, yes, I read it a long time ago. I remember some very dark moments.
Yes,
with characters. Yeah, I won't say it.
Oh, so heartbreaking when the entire class is being murdered and just the door closes. Oh my god!
Yeah. The class,
Boss is like, "Are you really going to do this?" And he's just like,
Even darker in Omega, where Kitty is like, she knows her love will stop him or something, and he just kills her then. Like, that was really dark stuff. But, one of the things I just want to say, Scott, is I want to give you complete credit for Age of Apocalypse and what you did there, because we've talked about this on previous episodes of the podcast. What you did was a game changer, not just for the franchise, but for the industry at large. You took the best-selling comic at the time. The entire comic book industry is reliant on the success of the X-Men. And you're like, we're going to cancel this, and we're going to do this different story. And this is before the age of the internet. This is before any of that. No one knows what the fuck is going on. I remember going to the grocery store on the spinner rack and seeing Age of Apocalypse and having no clue, and the rumors being that this was a new status quo. And what you did, you told a very cohesive, epic story that is probably the best X-Men event ever written. And it's so well done. All the books feed in. So really, kudos to you on that. And I hope you understand how much that story has resonated with so much of us.
Thank you. I will say that, I take that as I accept that as a compliment, but I do have to say that, like you look at the other books and there was not there wasn't a clinker, there wasn't, something where you go, I didn't really like Excalibur. I didn't really like Factor X or one of those things. I mean, I think that everybody really, really, really upped their game. I do also, I remember for just 10 minutes we thought, what if, this is such a hit? Like, what if we went 6 months? What if we went a year? Like, what if we could, So, but I think 4 issues was probably the perfect amount of time. So, I will tell you, this just a side note. Like, when I was at DC, I really, really wanted to. I really tried to convince them of this idea of something happens where Superman, Lois Lane needs an operation, and the only place she can get it is she has to go to Gotham, because that's where the surgery is and that's where the doctors are. And so he takes her to Gotham at the same time that Lex Luthor is trying to take over Wayne Enterprises. So Batman has to go and live in Metropolis for 6 months to a year. And like what that would mean to, a Joker who is suddenly like, wait a minute, I get to go up against Superman. Oh my God. Like his mind just gets, goes crazy. Like if you think he was crazy before, think about how crazy he would be with Superman as an adversary. And the idea of like Lex having to deal with a Batman, and he's like, this guy does not obey a single rule or law. He does what, like he's, he shows up over my bed. He's under my bed. He's like, do all these things. Whereas he would do all the things that Superman, who has this essentially this code of justice, would never do. But Batman's like, screw this. And so the idea of them going up against, Superman living at Wayne Manor, where Alfred is like, I have nothing to do. Like, I can't even polish the Batmobile. He doesn't even take the Batmobile out. He just flies everywhere he's going. So the idea is to really like examine how their lives would be if they were in each other's cities, in each other's world, dealing with each other's villains, and what that would mean to Gotham if suddenly a Superman showed up. So that's one of those things where like I think it could have been as popular as Age of Apocalypse, and yet grounded in the world instead of necessarily stepping out of the world. But you'll find over the years that people rarely listen to me. So,
well, they're fools. Harry, I have you next for a question.
Hi, Scott. So obviously the characters have been through a lot since your time with them. So is there any that's been your favorite in terms of how they've been handled?
Oh, I'll be honest. I read the issue after I left when Steve Siegel and what's his name? Joe Casey took over, and I didn't really recognize the characters of the book, so I'm like, maybe this isn't for me. I read the first issues by Grant and by Joe, and I'm like, And then I read Joss, because I was very curious to see how he brought back Peter after Kitty.
You killed him.
Yeah, I killed him, but then Kitty splashed his ashes all over the Usterdensky collective, and I thought, okay, that's it for him. And then he came back. So, having said that, over the years, I just realized that the X-Men are just not for me anymore. I think I was talking to a dear older friend of mine who has written many, 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 many comic books, and we kind of agree that once you leave a book, everything after that becomes fan fiction, because you can't help but look and go, that's not how I would have handled it, So, like, every once in a while, I would look and I'd be like, "Oh, Juggernaut's on the team," and they're like, "Juggernaut's the biggest, bestest mutant there ever was." I'm like, but he's not a mutant. He's has the Crimson Bands of Sideric to give him his power. It's like, so it's like sometimes I look at other people taking over, and I think, how much research have they done into this series? So I won't name any names, but I'm always curious.
Well, that's funny.
But either way, yeah. So I feel bad. Like I didn't read any of the what was it? Krakoa storyline. I didn't read Hellfire. I didn't read No More Mutants. I don't know if that was an X-Men series, but I just so yeah. To answer your question, I hate to sound like a colossal prick, but I just can't read them anymore. So
well, that's fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. What was your favorite story after me? I think you're muted.
Yeah, Harry, what was your favorite story after Scott left the books?
Oh, I don't know. Just to be honest, gotta do it.
All right. Well, it sounds
like he can't do it.
Okay. Sounds like we had a similar experience.
Teddy, we have you up next for a question.
Hello, thank you for being here today. It's obviously important to a lot of us. My first ever comic was Generation X number 19, so it all holds a very special place. And being a young person, it was really influential to see the dynamics between all of these young people, so thank you. My question is, from your writing for Generation X specifically, what's your favorite smaller moment between characters, or your favorite character dynamic that you wrote?
I think my favorite scene was the scene where Paige got drunk and she was asleep on the not asleep, she was kind of moving around on the pool table, and she just couldn't accept the fact that all her planning, all her ambition, her idea of making the Guthrie family proud of her, and by going into the X-Men and doing what her brother couldn't necessarily do at that time, and it all got wiped away with this realization that for all her why train, why do this, why aspire to more if you're just going to get killed for being who you are, and so I thought that was probably my favorite scene. So did you read that scene? Or I think it was in issue 5. Okay.
Really good. Of course, I've read the whole thing, haven't we all?
What about you? Do you have a favorite scene?
Oh, that's difficult. There's a specific scene where Emma is cooking and she has that apron on that's it says something everyone cooks with spice or something. And I think that was really funny. But my favorite dynamic to read is Jubilee and Monet's relationship, how they start off really hostile towards one another, and then it turns into a really nice friendship.
I will tell you one other scene that I really loved was when Emma and Artie and Leech were taken captive by the what were they called? Gene Nation characters, and Mara was using paint to paint a big smile on Emma's face, and she was trapped there, and she was being tortured, and the kids were about to be tortured, and she realized that she couldn't use her power because Leech was right at her feet. They put him right at her feet so she couldn't use her powers. So she's all tied up, and she looks at him and she's like, "Sorry about this," and she kicks him the length of the room, and he slams into the wall. And Nation is like, "What?" I always thought that was fun. And I've told this story before where the editor got mad and went to Bob and said, "You can't have Emma kicking a kid. You have to get rid of her from Generation X now." And so Bob was like, "Oh yeah, that's a good point." So he came to me and go, "Yeah, get rid of Emma because she kicked the kid." I said, "Yeah, but she's Emma and she saved everybody." I don't think Sean would have done it. I don't think anyone else would have done it. But sure, certainly 100% Emma would have done that. So, so I thought like just by staying true to the character, you could get away with it, you know. And I think she probably crossed a few lines over her time as the headmistress of Xavier Institute. So.
Thank you for fighting for Emma, because that's one of my favorite scenes of Emma in Generation X, right? And that's sort of New York issue where they go to Manhattan and there's Leech and Emma just clocks him. Was great.
Yeah. Then at the end, he's like, please don't take Leech again. I will tell you, it was years later when Grant used Emma, and then people, oh my God, that's genius. Grant took Emma and put her in the X-Men. That's amazing. I'm like, did anyone ever read Generation X? Like, what? That was pretty fun. Like, yeah, that Grant.
We have positive fan next with a question.
Oh, thank God. Thank God someone positive. Just kidding.
You know, she did feel bad about kicking Leech, though. So that, you know, she had a heart. Scott, one of the things that really struck me when I read the first 4 issues of Generation X yesterday was that they take some time to get through, which is awesome. Like, I don't know if anybody else felt that way, but, you know, the first issue of a comic might come out today, and I could probably read it in 5 to 7 minutes or something like that. And I really appreciated that, you know, there was a lot of meat to it. So I just wanted to give you that compliment first and just say it felt really good to sit down and be like, you know, this is I'm going to read these 4 comics and it's going to take an hour of my time or something like that, you know. So I thought that was awesome. And one of the things that really stood out to me upon reread. And now an actual question is, you know, in your time on Uncanny and X-Men and Generation X, you had issues where there were big major showdowns and action and, you know, all kinds of major events happening. But then you also had issues that were just almost all character interaction where I think that you or Fabian used to call them back in the day like Seinfeld issues where it was just about them hanging out at the mansion and you would explore character dynamics, but it wasn't necessarily pushing forward big plot points. And I was curious, you know, looking at those two, with having your issues that really ran the gamut between big action, you know, showdowns and ones that were quieter. Did you have a preference between those? And just wondering, you know, why you might have gravitated towards one or the other.
Oh yeah, I loved. I used to call them the rooftop issues because one of the very first stories they did had Rogue and Gambit on the rooftop, and for years it was like, oh, they can't be together. And I'd be at a convention, people go, oh, you write them so they can never be together, and I don't like that. And you're writing, and the way you write them, I'm like, look, I've been around for like 3 years on the X-Men title. I don't think I ever wrote the two of them on panel together. Like, it just wasn't something that I was doing. So when I had the chance, I did that scene where she's upset because they're never going to be touched, and he's like this kind of ladies guy, and he like accepts her every word, and he leaves, and she just, you know, starts crying because she realizes she's going to be alone forever. And then he comes back with a blanket and throws it over her shoulders, and he just holds her, and, you know, and I was like, oh, sweet. And so that became, you know, the code that whenever I'm going to do a rooftop issue after this crossover. And we saw it even in that same issue where, you know, the story about the techno-organic virus and the, what's it called, the, in Executioner, I think it was Executioner Agenda.
The Legacy Virus.
Is that was the name of that big series, overarching arc?
Oh, the Executioner song?
Executioner, yeah. Like, that wasn't those are two. The Legacy Virus was one thing, but the techno-organic virus that got, they thought Xavier was dead, and then it was...
Oh, yeah, Executioner song. Yeah.
Yeah, Executioner, yeah. So he shot him at the park, and we thought he was dead. And then when they got the cure, I was like, well, if he gets the cure, what if he can like walk for like a little bit, like because he has this techno-organic virus? And I thought, geez, if he could walk, what would he do? And I'm like, well, naturally, Jubilee would teach him how to rollerblade. That only makes sense. And then I was like, well, she is a bit of a squirt, so she would naturally ride him into the lake after she, took him for a spin. And then the idea of spending the last 3 pages with with him and Jubilee, and to have her, because she really was kind of a punk-ass kid originally, to have her be like, I just spent all this time with this guy, and he's really, he's a regular person. He's not this, jerk that I thought he was. And now he has to go back to his wheelchair. And she just like sobs and she, prays to God, just let him get to his chair. And when you see him stumble, you realize he's not going to be able to do it. And then she comes up next to him and helps him to his chair. Like, to me, if all I got out of the Executioner song was that scene, like that's all that, that's all that mattered. In fact, I can't even, I remember the speech he gives in the beginning, which I really love, but other than that, I can't remember much about Executioner song. So, but I do remember that. And yeah, and I will tell you one time when they were about to get married, and I think it was the time when Scott and Corsair went on their trip, the head of marketing came down to the offices and said, I gotta say, Lobdell hasn't thrown a single punch in the X-Men in like 4 issues. And Bob was like, well, we can get it, we'll do it, we'll just, we can bring in stuff. He goes, no, I kind of like it. And so it was like, so yeah, I mean, any opportunity. The good thing is Fabian loved to plot, and Fabian was a great plotter. I was somebody that really, really just wanted to, dig a spoon into the character's heart or their guts and see what was in there. So
the Onslaught epilogue issue is one of my favorites. I probably come back to that one, I don't know, at least every year. It's really great. And then also the issue where Cable, it's Cyclops' bachelor party and he gets held up, and Cable and Cyclops have the bonding. Those are really formative issues for me. So thanks, Scott, and really cool to talk to you.
Thank you.
Lux, we have you up next.
Yeah, so my question is part question, part thinly veiled attempt to plug my Bobby corner in my nerd room. I just put that in the chat. But one of the great things about X-Men is that you can have those 4 issues where you don't throw a punch. Is there a character from any era that you think deserves their own title, like I have all my different Icemans on the side there, or just a character where we focus on them for 4 issues without throwing a punch?
Certainly, I think any character is worth exploring. I think that a lot of the problems with miniseries is that people write miniseries in a way where it's like, I'm going to take Storm on page 1, and when I come back in 80 pages, here she is, she's back, and you can use her again. And it's like, okay, well then talk about like a Seinfeld episode. It's like they're almost geared towards making sure that nothing happens so that when the story's done, they can come right back in and fit in place. Whereas like I did a series where they were, it was aborted, but I did this series in where they were all going to go out into space, and it was Bishop, Deathbird, Hank, his girlfriend Trish, and I think Gambit and Rogue,
and Joseph.
And Joseph, yeah. Oh, that's right, because he needed the triangle. And so the idea was that this story was going to go for a year, and at the end of the year, they were going to come back, and it was as if they had gone to war. And so the regular X-Men are like, hey, you're back. And the other X-Men are going to be like, you don't know the things we did to survive. They were all going to come back with PTSD. And so, oh, that's really cool. And I think that that's the problem is that, like people just don't, I don't want to say kick the characters in the balls, but they don't want to, they don't want to take that miniseries. Like, not to toot my own horn, but like a Scotty's son and Cyclops and Phoenix was a perfect example. Like, they had to get back, but in that story, they raised their son, and they raised the difference between Cable and Stripe. And even though they left and Cable never really understood that Slim and Red were Jean and Scott, at least within the context of that story, made it so that you could read this epic adventure over the course of 6 issues. So there are characters. I mean, I do think, I certainly fell in love with Bobby. I really think that any character could do with a really good miniseries. So,
yeah.
What about you? Who's your, if you could see one character, who would it be?
So, I mean, obviously, Bobby's had his fair share and then some, I would say. One of my tops, though, that I think should get explored more, Glob Herman. He's such like a weird character, but every time I see him,
who is that? Who?
Glob Herman.
Oh, that's is that Ecstatic? Is that character?
I'm not sure what issue he came
He was
in.
a Morrison. He was a Morrison creation. He's like the bigger guy who's translucent with a skeleton. Yeah, you probably see him online with like pancakes because he's like a pancake person now.
Well, what's interesting too is I had invented a character called Quietus, who similarly was a character that was translucent that you could see through. In the storyline right before that storyline, in my Genosha storyline. So I always thought it was interesting that, like, that this Glob guy got all the press. In Quietus's defense, he was he only had he looked really freaky, but his only power was that he could give someone an ice cream headache. And at first people were like, well, what good does that do? But then he went up against Magneto. Magneto was like, holy yeah. Really was distracted by this ice cream headache. So, but no, I mean, it sounds like an interesting character. Maybe I don't mean this in a glib way, but maybe you'll get to write him someday.
Yeah. All right. So we have time for 2 more questions. And Jackson, why don't you be our penultimate question asker?
My question is, out of everything you've ever written, do you have like a favorite issue, like number one?
Is that Monet there with you?
Oh yeah, this.
All right. If you look on Instagram, you can see people cosplaying as Chamber.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. So, I'm sorry. So your question was?
Okay, if you had a favorite, like out of everything you ever wrote, do you have like a favorite issue of all time?
The X-Men. I would say that my most clever issue that I wrote, and I think it's interesting because, Joe Madureira, who was like one of the best, really wanted to leave the X-Men and go and draw Spider-Man. And they were like, absolutely not, you have to do the X-Men. And I was like, he's Joe Madureira. He could write, Squirrel Girl, and it'd be a #1 book. I mean, like, let him do what he wants. If he wants to do, I mean, we certainly survived many artists coming and going on X-Men. Let him go and do that. And they're like, no, he can't. He has to draw X-Men. So I wrote an issue where there were no X-Men in it. It was just Spider-Man and J. Jonah Jameson. And J. Jonah Jameson was approached by Bastion. And Bastion's like, we know, how biased you are, and we want to use the press to go after mutants. And J. Jonah Jameson was like, get the out of here, like, take off. Like, I'm not, like, I'm a reporter. Like, I tell the truth. I believe that Spider-Man is a threat. I don't do that to sell newspapers. I do that because, because I think Spider-Man is genuinely a menace. And Bishop Bastion threatens him. And then you really, really dig into J. Jonah Jameson, and you're like, wow, like, he really does believe in something, and he's not going to use the press to go after mutants. And then you also had Spider-Man fighting Marrow, and the idea was not just to have Spider-Man in the book, but it was like, we always hear about how the mutants are sworn to protect a world that fears and hates them. And I'm like, well, what is Spider-Man's take on that? Like, what is Spider-Man's take on the mutants? Like, in the old days, the Avengers and Defenders and everybody would kind of look askance at the X-Men and the mutants. And then, now the X-Men, now the Avengers membership seems to include everyone but Willie Lumpkin. Like pretty much everybody in the Marvel universe has either been or will be a Avenger. So to me, there's really there's not that line between Avengers and X-Men anymore. So that was a way to explore what does the average person, and if you're looking at theater as an average person, how do they look at the situation with mutants? So I thought that was like a really interesting way to look at mutants by writing an issue where mutants don't appear. I thought. So, what about you? What was your favorite one?
Yeah, I really liked Generation X #1 because it was different than everything else in the comic book. So.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun, and the funny thing too is that, like I said, it was a family affair. I mean, like when in issue 2, I think when they what's the word? When they're playing Scrabble, it's called Searching. And what I really loved about it is that, like, I just said they're sitting there playing a game, and Chris was the one that put like the word hick and then the other word loser and all this, and it shows up. And it just made me laugh because it was like people would say afterwards, they'd be like, wow, you two were a team. Like, you must have written every issue full script, so he knew exactly what to draw. I go, no, actually, it couldn't have been farther from the truth. I would write a plot. Chris would do what he wanted to do artistically, and then it was up to me to tell the story. So I always, it was, I don't know if it was Lennon and McCarthy, but it was certainly, a great team. And so we talked about doing something a few, I don't know, it was 6 months ago. We got in touch and I said, oh yeah, we should really do something. He goes, oh, I'd love to. He goes, I'm free in about 4 years. So, like, well, if I'm alive in 4 years, I'll look you up.
Well,
but he was being very sincere. I mean, I'm not.
I think we would all love to see a reunion between you and Chris. I mean, it really was lightning in the bottle. And, it's so funny. I was just talking with Rod before we jumped onto the Zoom, that scene of them playing Scrabble and playing out Hick right there for Paige. It almost felt like it was a manifestation of everything she was trying not to show. And Skin could just pick it up on her. I mean, I loved that dynamic so much.
You called him a loser, and he's like, I'm not. Oh, like, don't call me. Like, love that the dynamic. Also, this is a little inside baseball, but I used to be really bad about, like, instead of saying Magneto, I'd say Magneto, or instead of Submariner, I'd say Submariner, and they would always tease me, and they'd be like, your understanding of English really escapes you sometimes, and so they used to call me Scoot because they're like, if I would mess up all their names, it's like, okay, there's only one version of Scott, but everybody would call me Scoot just to be like, that was their affectionate name for me. And if you look at the second issue of the game, the Scrabble game, right underneath the credits is the word Scoot, like spelled out. So,
it's really good.
Yeah. So.
All right, now bringing us in for our final question. It's my fellow Floridian, Dan.
Dun, dun, dun.
Hello. So I got into Generation X more recently because of somebody who's on here, which is Tori. She's the one who got me like very much into it. So like I'm still very.
Sorry, did Tori get a question?
No.
Shy.
Hi, Tori. That's okay. Good question. If you have one. But you're saying?
So she got me really into it, so I've been more into it recently, so I'm not caught up with everything, but I like pick and choose like Wikipedia's and what to like grab for trades wise. But my question more so just kind of like a we need more Skin. I feel like he's the most like Sync had his whole like resurgence with everything with Krakoa. So it's like it used to be like Sync was the one least used. But now Skin is literally like the least used Generation X, so it feels like he just needs more love in the comics. So I don't really know question per se. I think Skin needs more love, and I don't really know what else to say besides that.
I know a lot of characters died and they come back. Did he ever die? Or?
Yeah, he died next
He was crucified.
Yeah, that.
During Chuck Austin's run. And we've talked about it with Chuck Austin.
Right.
Sadly, yeah.
And they got his name wrong.
Yeah, and they got his name wrong. You're absolutely right.
What did he say?
That was
They got his name wrong. They wrote his name wrong in the comic when he died, and then he finally came back during the Krakoan era.
Well, you know, it's funny. I will tell you one thing that happened when people will say, "Oh, what's it like watching a movie with your characters and stuff?" And to me, one of the things that I loved the Generation X movie, and I know I had a different experience than other people watching it, but like to me, when you create a character, and that character introduces themselves to like Jubilee, and he's like, "Hi, I'm Angelo Espinosa." I was like, "Oh my god!" Like it just feels like you're like, "Oh my god!" Like that character that you created on paper is now, you know. But I feel the same way when I watch Happy Death Day or Man of the House or any of the other movies. It's like there's just this rush you get from seeing, you know, like in Happy Death Day, her name was Teresa Gelman, and they call her Tree for short. And I was dating Teresa Gelman when I was writing the movie, and I used to call her Tree for short. And so then when she actually made it all the way into the movie and she had that name, it was like, oh my god, that's so, you know. You see it in the IMDb credits, you're like, oh, you know, you talk about one thing, somebody mentioned about the X-Men after Onslaught. It was X-Men Prime. And I used to have this rule. People would always say, oh man, you got to put me in a comic book. And I just go, okay, but if I do, I'm going to kill you. I have to kill you. And they're like, okay, I'll be killed. And so Dennis Hogan, maybe one of my oldest friends, is the guy that gets killed on the porch of the mansion where he didn't quite make it in time. You know, he was like he was being chased and he was running through the backwoods and he gets killed on the doorsteps of the mansion. So that was Dennis Hogan and he got killed. So
that was also, Scott, that was, sorry, Jay Spring, I know we're out of time, but you know, when Dennis Hogan died, there was a news story. Like, it's sad how relevant some of these comics that are so old still are today, but that was the thing that pushed Charles over the edge to have Onslaught like actually reveal himself. That the people that were arrested for murdering him were allowed to, they got off. They saw no consequences for it. And I was just wondering, did you come up, like, I always thought when I revisited Onslaught last year, that detail jumped out at me. I thought that was really cool, that there were all these sort of mounting stressors for Charles, but it was that news report that came out, and then that's when all of a sudden, you know, he realized he was Onslaught and everything like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of, you know, like when, like the very, very, very first time Onslaught's ever mentioned is when Juggernaut mentions him. You know, he gets beat up and they're like, what happened? He's like, Onslaught, and he passes out. And really, I mean, it was made up at the time, because at the time I pitched it to the room and they said, oh my god, that's so cool, who's Onslaught? I go, I have no idea, but I love that. I love the name, I love the setup, I love that he beat up Juggernaut. Who could beat up Juggernaut? And the editors came to Bob and they said, you can't have Juggernaut get beat up and not know who it is. And so Bob's like, okay, we have to explain who Onslaught is. I go, no, I have no interest. You know, I thought it was a cool scene, and you know, and then about a year later, I guess, when we needed to Two Heroes Reborn, and we needed a character that could take a dimension and put it away in this like side dimension. And we were thinking, well, who could it be? It can't be Apocalypse. We just used him. It's not Kingpin. It's not Doc Ock. Like, who could? And then one day I was at home. I'm like, oh my god! So I came in the office. I go, Onslaught, and they're like, why do you think Onslaught can do it? I go, he can do anything. He just beat up Juggernaut. Come on, like, you know. So then we started working backwards from where we needed to be. And then when you think about it, like, just by accident, the first person that he lashed out at was his brother, Kane Marco, his stepbrother. So, like, you know, so when you look at it all in a straight line, you go, well, that's Scott. He really thinks everything through. This was a year in the making. So, no, it wasn't. It was just a bunch of breadcrumbs that I threw down and later went back and go, ooh, that looks like a tasty breadcrumb. So, but
the thing that I loved about Juggernaut falling though from the sky after Onslaught is he landed in. Wait, you have to say it.
Hoboken, New Jersey.
All places.
Well, I don't know if it was Frank Sinatra, but he certainly spent a lot of time there.
Yeah. So I live in Hoboken as well, and
listen, do me a favor. From now on, when you walk through Hoboken, you see a plaque that says Frank Sinatra. You should carry a little Juggernaut plaque under and just put it on underneath and see what people say.
Can I ask you specifically where do you think he landed in Hoboken? If you have to,
I believe it is at Washington and 9th because that's where I live.
Washington. Okay, so I live on Washington and 2nd now.
Okay, you're moving on.
So there you go.
There's got to be a plaque. I can't believe you haven't put up a plaque to Juggernaut yet.
If you come, we will go to Washington and 9th, and we will put a plaque up there.
Okay, there used to be a deli. I think it was named Lucy's, but it was right across from, you know. In fact, I'll tell you, when I first moved in, it was Stephanie and I went to see the place on a Saturday. Did I tell you the story?
Yeah.
We went to see it, and it was like, oh my god, this is perfect. There's this big building over there, and there's a little deli, a little cute little deli. I'm like, this is perfect. But it turned out that the cute building that was across the street was a high school. So from like 7 until 9 o'clock, you couldn't hear yourself talk. And then at noon, you couldn't talk because everybody would go for lunch. And then after school, you couldn't talk. You know, the editors would call me and go, hey, I gotta call you. I'll call you back. Like, what? So it turned out to be a disaster. And especially as a writer to try to, you know, I mean, that's how loud it was. It was crazy. Because, you know, Hoboken's all buildings, they all bounce off each other. So,
yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Maybe she did. Did Tori get a question? I feel bad if she got damn.
Tori.
I feel like I just have to ask a question now.
Okay.
Bring us home, Tori.
No pressure.
So first of all, Generation X, one of my favorite comic series of all time, which is why I'm trying to force Dan to read it for years. I think part of it is how stylized it is and reminiscent of that time in comics, like a lot of the Vertigo books and stuff. So I'm wondering if there were any other comics or media that kind of inspired you at that time, or something like, what is your favorite comic from like kind of that 90s era that you didn't write?
You know, it's hard to say because I was writing so much before I became there's a time from 88 to 92 where I was a stand-up comedian and a comic book writer, and I used to tell people I was making just enough to starve because I could not, you know, I wasn't making a lot of money doing either. And then the weekend that I got the X-Men in 92 completely changed my life because it was suddenly like a 70-hour work week. So I couldn't do stand-up anymore. I had no time to write. I had no time to go practice. I had no time to travel and be on the road. And so I would say that I did very little reading of other comic books because I didn't really have the time. I mean, certainly Mark DeMatteis and Keith Giffen's Justice League of America was really hot, and I remember reading Frank Miller and Dave Mazzucchelli's Daredevil books. What was it? Fall from Grace? Was it Fall from Grace? I forget. Amazing Grace? No, something.
Born Again.
Born Again. Yeah, and so that's the thing. So I did like the fact that there were talent who were coming in and not just, not just doing what everybody else has been doing. I remember like reading X-Men not X-Men, I'm sorry, Daredevil when I was in college, and he had introduced Electro, and he had introduced Bullseye. And when I would read the comic book, like this was the opposite of what you were talking about, where like it was so dense. With Frank, you could read an entire issue of Daredevil in like 5 minutes. It was like so much happening. And I used to read it in the coffee shop at Dutchess Community College with another comic book, so that I would open the page, I'd lay the other comic book on top of the opposing page, so that I could like stay with that page and enjoy it and look at just everything he'd done and how he built up to the fact that when you turn the next page, so I think that most of my influence on myself was writing comic books that, while I was still a fan, stuck with me. And if you haven't gotten Tori, have you ever read the first like 20 issues of Justice League of America by Keith and J.M. DeMatteis?
I have not.
It's a really pick up the trade, because it's really, really distinctive, and they're people have gone back and tried to do it again, but it was really, really, really amazing. And did you read Born Again?
Years ago, a very long time ago.
And it's so good. So, and the only other thing I'll say is that when I tried to break into Marvel for about 6 years, and I have 6 years worth of rejection letters. I don't have them anymore, but I used to. And it wasn't until I went back to college, and I studied Russian literature, that I was like, oh my God, I realized like there's just so much to writing that I didn't want to. I realized what I was doing was I was a comic fan who was learning to write comic books, and coming in and being like, hey, I can write comic book. And the editors were like, yeah, so can everybody else we've hired. So what do you have that's different? What are you bringing to it? And I think after I really immersed myself in Russian literature, and I really fell in love with the spoken word, and that's when I realized that, okay, between the stand-up comedy and the Russian literature, I realized that I was bringing in a different style of writing than what had been there. And I think that eventually people came to appreciate it. So, but thank you. That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. So
Thank you.
do you have a
For chamber, because I love chamber.
oh, is that a cat back there, by the way? Is that a cat bed?
Oh yeah, it's a bed, a cat bed.
And is that the real cat you have?
No, she's not in the room at the moment.
I thought maybe you had a fake cat, and you're like,
Oh, there's a real cat.
We got a real cat, and we got Harley too, Daniel's dog right there. Hi. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. What exciting projects? I know you and David have worked on something. He's been helping you with something. What projects do you have that you can talk about?
I just finished the screenplay 2 days ago, and it's a Western thriller, and it's about a guy who comes to this town, and he's accused of murdering someone. He gets hung, and then the first half of the movie, he tracks down the people that hung him, and then in the second half, he decides to take his revenge on the rest of the town. So in the course of the movie, he kills 37 people, and when he paints a big 0 over the 37, and he walks off into the distance. So it's like, it's almost like Terrifier as a Western, if you can, And the thing is that with the 37 people that he kills, he doesn't kill anybody the same way twice.
I love that. I mean, listen, we're big horror fans. We love Terrifier, and we love you. So this sounds like a match made in heaven.
Oh, I love you too. Is David still there?
David, are you still there? He's still here.
Oh yeah, I'm still here.
All right.
Oh, you got rid of the mirror. That mirror you were holding out to make it look like you had a brother?
Oh yeah, no, I put the mirror down.
Yeah.
No, my brother's actually leaving right now, so that's why I turned off the camera.
Oh, okay. Well, I miss you.
Miss you too, man.
All right. I don't miss you.
Hang soon. And Paul as well. I miss you. I miss you both. You guys are like on opposite sides of the world.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have brunch hopefully this week, David. But Scott, where can people find you? You're at Scott Lobdell 2.0 on Instagram. Is there anywhere else people can hit you up?
My house, but that would be weird giving out my address.
That's fair.
But you know what? I live in Long Beach, so if people want to, there's a Starbucks on the corner of Second and Covina. So if they want to make if they want to plan ahead and be like, hey, we'll meet you at the Starbucks, that seems fair,
We're all doing a road trip there. That's it. Next book club is going to be there, front and center. And it was actually fortuitous that you had mentioned. I forgot who asked about Skin. I think it was you, Dan, who asked about Skin. We are good friends with Agustin Rodriguez, who played Skin in the Generation X movie. So we've had drinks with him before. He's been on the podcast, but I wanted to do like a watch along with him. And Scott, we should most definitely have you there.
I thought he did great for it. So
I agree. I don't think he got the love that he deserved for that role. I mean, putting Skin front and center.
They did ask me to give notes on the script. And I said, well, one thing I would do is, like, if I were writing it, I would make a connection between Emma and the main villain. Like,
yeah.
And then that wound up in there. I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. And then I also did one other thing where I said, I forget what it was, but somebody goes over the edge and then Skin rescues him.
Yeah.
And that was another suggestion I made. And so when I saw, that the Skin, that his arms went in, and I believe he grabbed the person, right? He saved the person.
Yeah, and he bounces right back up.
Yeah, and so that was so he and I are even more connected because I made sure he got that big hero moment.
Well, I think he'll love to speak to you. Everyone,
is he still acting? Or?
Yeah. I think he just released a new movie these last few weeks, and we were trying to get him back on the podcast to promote it, but scheduling didn't work out.
Okay. Well, tell him I said hi and tell him I thought he did great.
All right, everyone, hit up Scott Lobdell on Instagram, Scott Lobdell 2.0.
Or Second Street, one or the other.
Or you can come to Washington and 9th Street in Hoboken, and we can put a plaque to Juggernaut there.
For the plaque.
Thank you all so much for joining. And Scott, I mean, you're our hero here. Thank you so much.